Okay, we're going to start off this series today on varieties of unbelief. The American philosopher and psychologist William James entitled his classic study of religion, The Varieties of Religious Experience. He presented and analyzed a large number of texts reporting on or personally claiming experiences of a transcendent divine reality. In addition to recognizing a great deal of individual variety, he identified varied types of religious experience, like the once born, the twice born, sainthood, mysticism, and so forth. There are also varieties of unbelief, which can range from, at one end of the spectrum, brisk rejection and sharp criticism of belief in God, to a deep sense of the mystery of human existence and a poignantly sympathetic appreciation of faith at the other. Unbelief is varied both intellectually and psychologically. For these 4 Sundays, I'm going to present 4 prominent unbelievers of the 19th and 20th centuries who represent varied expressions of unbelief. We'll start out with 2 eminent Victorians. Today with Thomas Henry Huxley, who invented the word agnostic. Sunday after next, we'll look at the atheism of one of Huxley's famous contemporaries, Mary Ann Evans, better known by her pen name George Eliot, who in her novels gave voice to what she called the religion of humanity and was deeply sympathetic toward those who still believed in God. Our 3rd Sunday will focus on Bertran Russell, one of the creators of modern British philosophy, an internationally well-known writer. There we go. And speaker on an impressive range of topics and an indefatigable social and political activist. He called himself an agnostic, but was sharply critical of Christianity and religion generally. And finally, we'll examine the ideas of one of the most famous of the existentialists and a mother of second-wave feminism, Simone de Beauvoir. Raised as a Catholic by her devoutly Catholic mother, she lost her faith as a teenager. As an adult, Beauvoir, together with Jean-Paul Sartre, considered herself an atheist, believing that humans are as though abandoned, self-aware inhabitants of a world and universe that are simply there, who must freely create all the meaning and value to be found in the world. But today we're starting at Thomas Henry Huxley, and a brief biography. I will start with, let's see, where, yeah, there he is. The good Victorian mutton chop. The first agnostic. The eminent Victorian biologist and man of letters, Thomas Henry Huxley, coined the term agnostic in 1869 to describe his own perspective on a number of philosophical and theological questions. Huxley was a remarkable figure in 19th century Britain. He was born in 1825 in Ealing, near London, the 7th of 8 children in a family that was never very well off. Huxley's only formal childhood education was 2 years at Ealing School, where his father taught mathematics. The family moved to Coventry in 1835, and that ended his school education. But the young Huxley read voraciously on his own in science, history, and philosophy, and taught himself German. At the age of 15, Huxley began a medical apprenticeship and won a scholarship to study at Charing Cross Hospital in London. At the age of 21, we're now up to 1846, he signed on as an assistant surgeon on a Royal Navy ship assigned to chart the seas beyond Australia and New Zealand. Huxley spent his days studying marine invertebrates and sending off his findings to scientists in England. While in port in Sydney, Australia, he met, fell in love with, and became engaged to Henrietta Heathorn. The exploratory ship returned to England in 1850. Huxley discovered that his research had earned him at the age of 25 entrance into the ranks of British scientists and was rubbing shoulders with people like the geologist Charles Lyell, the botanist Joseph Hooker, and of course Charles Darwin. He was elected to the Royal Society at age 26. In 1854, Huxley secured a lectureship at the London School of Mines, that's M-I-N-E-S, like the Colorado School of Mines. And that meant that he could finally and properly send for his fiancée, and they were married in 1855. As a biologist, Huxley advanced knowledge of both invertebrate and vertebrate evolution, hypothesized that birds evolved from dinosaurs. He was one of the first. I read a review of the story of birds and started out with Thomas Henry Huxley. And he contributed substantially to science education. He became known later as Darwin's bulldog, actively involved in the public defense of evolution on behalf of the shy and retiring Darwin. Huxley, the Victorian man of letters, also engaged energetically in the discussion and debate over the great moral, social, philosophical, and theological issues of the day. In his 1893 essay, Evolution and Ethics, he famously argued against social Darwinists like Herbert Spencer. More about him when we come to Eliot. That the moral imperative for human society is not the survival of the fittest, but the fitting of as many as possible to survive. Thomas and Henrietta's legacy as progenitors was impressive. We have a small dynasty here. Their son Leonard was a noted biographer. Leonard's oldest son Julian became an evolutionary biologist and one of the creators of what's called the modern synthesis of evolutionary theory and genetics. Another son of Leonard's, Sir Andrew Huxley, shared the 1963 Nobel Prize in Physiology Medicine. Julian's son Francis became a noted anthropologist. And of course, the best known of Leonard's sons was Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World and many other novels and essays. Okay. T.H. Huxley's intellectual world was shaped by three important revolutions in philosophy, science, and the historical study of religion. If you were involved in my last year's series on makers of modern Protestant theology, this will sound familiar. First, a central feature of Western philosophy from the ancient Greeks to the modern world was metaphysics, working out reasoned explanations to answer the most fundamental questions about the nature of reality. In the 18th century, however, the skepticism of a philosopher, of one of the great philosophers of the period, David Hume, and the critical philosophy of Immanuel Kant, another one of the philosophers who main watersheds in philosophy. Both were influenced by the rapid growth of scientific knowledge, using the methods of empirical investigation and mathematics. Hume's and Kant's arguments persuaded a growing number of thinkers in the 19th century that the scope of our theoretical knowledge, what Kant called pure reason, is limited to understanding the physical world through the sciences. But Kant also argued that an equally important mode of thinking is what he called practical reasoning. Our reasoning about ethics, religion, and other aspects of distinctively human experience. Our reasoning about the important beliefs and practices by which we make sense of our lives and our relations with one another as human subjects. And Kant formulated what he called postulates. That is, in order to make sense of this practice among human beings, we have to we have to postulate some trans-physical force or person. The second revolution to influence Huxley was, of course, scientific evolutionism, the theory of natural selection developed by Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, which was preceded by the work of geologists like Charles Lyell that showed that the Earth was much older than the prevailing Genesis-inspired view held. And of course, Huxley was both an advocate for and a contributor to the new theory, which, when unified with genetics, as I've said, would become what's called the modern synthesis, one of the foundational pillars of modern science. A third paradigm-shifting change came with the growing influence of historical critical study of the Bible in the 19th century, together with the rise of social scientific and comparative study of religion. German scholars played the major role in the development of biblical reinterpretation. Among the pioneers in the social scientific study of religion were people like Émile Durkheim in France and Sir James Fraser in Britain. So, with that background, we'll look at Huxley as the inventor in 1869 of a new word in the English language. In his essay, Agnosticism, Huxley described his invention of the term agnostic. When I reached intellectual maturity, he writes, and this is a long quote, and began to ask myself whether I was an atheist, a theist, or a pantheist, a materialist or an idealist, a Christian or a freethinker, I found that the more I learned and reflected, the less ready was the answer. Until at last I came to the conclusion that I had neither heart nor part with any of these denominations except the last, and that's freethinker. The one thing in which most of these people were agreed was the one thing in which I differed from them. They were quite sure they had attained a certain gnosis, that's a Greek word for knowledge, had more or less successfully solved the problem of existence, while I was quite sure I had not, and had a pretty strong conviction that the problem was insoluble. Later, Huxley became a member of the celebrated Metaphysical Society, it was called, a discussion group that was a kind of who's who of British men of distinction, prominent philosophers, scientists, writers, lawyers, parliamentary cabinet ministers. Huxley discovered, he relates, that, quote, most of my colleagues were ists, I-S-T-S, on the end, like theists, atheists, pantheists, naturalists, supernaturalists, of one sort or another. So I took thought and invented what I conceived to be the appropriate title of agnostic. It came into my head as suggestively antithetic to the Gnostic of Christian history, who professed to know so much about the very things of which I was ignorant, unquote. In the early church, the Gnostic Christians believed people could attain salvation through an esoteric gnosis, knowledge of the true God and the soul's nature and destiny, imparted through secret rituals. The great archaeological discoveries in Nag Hammadi in Egypt in 1945 really greatly enlarged our knowledge of Gnostic Christianity. They found these huge urns full of the manuscripts of the Gnostic Christian community. Huxley created the word agnostic by adding an A as a negating prefix to the word Gnostic, thus not knowing. Of course, we have a number of words in English that use the letter A as a negating prefix. Words like atheism, anonymous, aphasia, atonal, asexual, ahistorical. In the case of agnostic, although in English we don't normally pronounce the opening G in Gnostic, when we add the negating prefix A, we pronounce the G. After Huxley introduced the term to the Metaphysical Society, it caught on quickly. appropriated by many freethinkers as an apt label for their views, and criticized by many theologians and clergy as atheism under another name. When I call Huxley the first agnostic, I obviously don't mean that nobody had ever been skeptical or doubted before him. There have always been skeptics, going back to ancient Greece, India, China, and probably earlier. The Western philosophical tradition itself has wrestled with the problem of doubt or skepticism since well before Socrates and Plato. I simply meant that since he invented the term, Huxley was the first to call his skepticism agnosticism. But how Huxley himself interpreted agnosticism is what especially interests me. Oh, I got past that. Whoa, I'm going backwards, sorry. There we go.
Happens to me all the time.
But how Huxley himself interpreted agnosticism is what especially interests me. He characterized agnosticism not as a specific set of ideas, but as an attitude of not knowing, of uncertainty, arising out of a deeply felt sense of the limitations of human knowledge with regard to the most fundamental human questions. Such an outlook, Huxley argued, can manifest itself in a variety of ways intellectually, and I would add also in a variety of sensibilities or temperaments. His own view was that agnosticism is at bottom simply adherence to the principle that we should reserve judgment about confident assertions of a number of theological and philosophical claims on the grounds that the evidence available to us is insufficient to provide a basis for reasonable belief. So agnosticism is not an ism, certainly for Huxley, in the sense in which Huxley thought of the isms of his day. It might be better called the agnostic frame of mind or the agnostic spirit. Now Huxley was open-minded and expansive in the way he applied what he called the agnostic principle to a range of issues. And he was quite willing to allow others to define the scope and limits of agnosticism in their own way. In his agnosticism essay, he wrote this, quote, "The extent of the region of the uncertain, the number of the problems, the investigation of which ends in a verdict of not proven, will vary according to the knowledge and the intellectual habits of the individual agnostic. What I am sure about is that there are many topics about which I know nothing, and which, so far as I can see, are out of reach of my faculties. But whether those things are knowable by anyone else is exactly one of those matters which is beyond my knowledge, though I may have a tolerably strong opinion as to the probabilities of the case." Huxley did not believe that he himself could confidently pronounce on issues such as theism versus atheism, idealism versus materialism, and the immortality of the soul. And he seriously doubted that anyone else was in a position to do so. He certainly had his opinions on a number of philosophical and theological questions as to where the preponderance of the evidence pointed, but he always tried carefully to distinguish between doubt and outright denial. And of course, when people think about agnosticism or use the term, they're typically referring to the question of God. So we distinguish among theism, belief in the creator, redeemer God of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, atheism, the belief that there is no God, and agnosticism, the view that we don't really know, a suspension of judgment in the face of the arguments on both sides. That was clearly the central issue for most people throughout the debate about agnosticism when the term became widely used. I'm simply observing that Huxley himself used the term agnostic more broadly. And now I'll say something about one aspect of his breadth that may be surprising. In allowing that the agnostic frame of mind could express itself across a broad spectrum of opinions and sensibilities. Huxley recognized it even among some of the theologians of his day. He maintained that the agnostics' quarrel was not with what he called scientific theology, but with uncritically held dogmas and doctrines. Huxley did not spell out what he meant by scientific theology, but he clearly had in mind the liberal, Anglican, and other Protestant clergy and theologians of his day who were reinterpreting the Bible and Christian teachings in terms of modern intellectual developments such as biblical criticism and scientific evolutionism. And Huxley wrote this about it. Well, the agnostic, knowing too well the influence of prejudice and idiosyncrasy, can wish for nothing more urgently than that the scientific theologian should not only be at perfect liberty to thrash out the matter in his own fashion, but that he should, if he can, find flaws in the agnostic position. And even if demonstration is not to be had, that he should put in their full force the grounds of the conclusions he thinks probable. The scientific theologian admits the agnostic principle, however widely his results may differ from those reached by the majority of agnostics. Huxley and some of the other Victorian agnostics were sympathetic toward and supportive of the struggling emergence of liberal theology in the writings, speeches, and sermons of Anglican clergy such as Benjamin Jewett, the great translator of Plato, but also a leading exponent of biblical criticism, and Charles Kingsley, a cleric who was also a popular novelist and a public spokesman for evolution. The writer, educator, and cultural critic Matthew Arnold, there he is, whom I describe as dwelling in the borderlands between a liberal Christian and a secular humanistic outlook, was another important figure in the liberalization of British religious thought. Arnold was conversant with German biblical criticism well before many of his British theological contemporaries were. He accepted Kant's view that we have only beliefs and not knowledge about realities that transcend the physical world, and he was an early advocate of Darwin's evolutionary theory. In his most influential book on religion, which he entitled Literature and Dogma, published in 1873, Arnold undertook what could be called an agnostic reconstruction of biblical interpretation and Christian theology on the basis of human experience. Known for his statement that conduct is 3/4 of life, Arnold found what he considered a verifiable basis for religion in morality, arguing that religion, quote, is ethics heightened, enkindled, lit up by feeling, unquote. He also argued that, quote, the language of the Bible is literary, not scientific language, language thrown out at an object of consciousness not fully grasped, unquote, which he called the not ourselves, to which a deeply felt moral life is a response. The not ourselves is a transcendence, fragmentarily grasped and expressed in our experience, which he called the eternal. As a kind of quick postscript to Matthew Arnold, I'll just add that his poem, Dover Beach, is one of the great literary expressions of the Victorian struggle between faith and death. If you haven't ever read it, you should read it. He wrote it on his honeymoon. They were honeymooning on the beach at Dover, the white cliffs, the chalk cliffs on the southern coast. Huxley saw in these liberal Christian reinterpreters a passion for the honesty he admired as the great intellectual virtue, a conscientious effort to reshape Christian thought and life, fully assimilating the new ideas and embodying a new humility about the scope of knowledge. But most of those who came to call themselves agnostics reached a point at which they felt simply unable to accept even reinterpreted Christian beliefs and to participate in the life of the church. These were people who broke away from the religious tradition in which they had been raised, sometimes with anguish, and often at the cost of family disruption and social disapproval. We will see that in the case of George Eliot. The biographies of notable Victorian agnostics show their varied experiences of making the break. Among them were people such as Huxley himself, the historian and biographer Leslie Stephen, who was the father of Virginia Woolf, Harriet Martineau, one of the pioneering social theorists of the 19th century, the novelist and poet Thomas Hardy, and of course Darwin himself, who had originally studied for the ministry and only slowly and reluctantly came to his agnosticism. I'd like briefly to examine Leslie Stephen's agnosticism as a contrast to T.H. Huxley's embrace even of liberal Christians in describing the agnostic frame of mind. Leslie Stephen was, like Huxley, an eminent Victorian, and as I said, the father of Virginia Woolf. Stephen grew up in the evangelical tradition of the Church of England. The Church of England, Anglicanism, has low, broad, and high in terms of, and the low is the more evangelical, the very Protestant. The broad is those who adopt a variety of sort of centrist views, and then you have the high, which is the Anglo-Catholic wing of Anglicanism. The joke used to be low and lazy, broad and hazy, high and crazy. Although he was never particularly devout, Stephen was interested in religious issues, became well-read in biblical criticism, and as a Cambridge University student identified with the views of the liberal Anglican clergy and theologians, most of whom were in what was called the Broad Church. He also had to be ordained in order to teach at Cambridge. That's what it was like in those days. He increasingly felt, it was sort of a kind of pro forma thing, you took holy orders in order so you could be on the faculty. He increasingly felt like a hypocrite, regularly conducting services in his college's chapel while becoming more and more skeptical about Christianity and its biblical foundations. He finally left Cambridge, moved to London, and became an independent scholar and writer. And indeed, he became one of the most distinguished intellectual and historians and biographers of the Victorian era. And wrote philosophical studies, biographies. He also became one of the most influential agnostic critics of Christianity of his time, with books such as Essays on Plain Speaking and Free Thinking and An Agnostic's Apology. And of course, apology classically meant a defense of your views. It didn't mean, I'm sorry, forgive me. After he left the church, Stephen came increasingly to criticize the views of the liberal theologians as a somewhat disingenuous halfway house. He wrote, quote, "All the attempts to reconcile the creeds to philosophy or the Bible to historical criticism are, in my opinion, hopeless." Unquote. And Stephen clearly went beyond Huxley in his views. And of course, we've seen that Huxley was generally supportive of the efforts of liberal theologians to interpret Christian thought in the light of the new sources of knowledge. And Stephen brusquely rejected that whole enterprise in the name of agnosticism. Well, to wind up, T.H. Huxley suffered a heart attack and died in 1895 at the age of 70, after a career that saw him become a highly respected member of the British establishment, and agnosticism become an increasingly accepted position on the spectrum of religious perspectives. That's, yeah, on Huxley. I'm trying to hold these to about 30 minutes so that we have time for questions, discussion. Yeah.
Thank you for the explanation of agnostic, because I never really knew what it meant. But in general, if somebody would say, just to the regular public, like I am, you know, the regular public, I'm an agnostic, what do most people think about? Do they think you're a disbeliever completely? Is that what they would
No.
think? Because that's an atheist.
I mean, that's not what the word means.
Yeah, but people,
Just means, I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't feel like we know enough for me to pronounce on that.
I understand that now that you told me, but I think I normally would not have separated it distinctly from atheist in my, you know,
Well,
misunderstanding.
yeah. Well, we're going to see in the case of Russell that for him, for him, agnosticism can be understood as tending toward atheism. But that was his own. This was un-Huxley-ish. And yeah, it's just. But it should mean simply somebody who feels like they don't know. And actually, we use the word agnostic in other contexts. If I say I'm agnostic about such and such an idea or such and such a theory, that's standard usage. Yeah. Well,
The word you haven't said, and I'm sure there's a reason for it, is faith. I mean, I believe I know these things only because through faith. I would also have to admit that there's many parts of my belief that I can't prove. What's the difference there? But because I you know, there are many things about Christianity, you know, in a serious discussion I'd have to say, no, I can't prove that. I really can't know that, but I know it through faith. Is faith the whole difference?
Well, yeah, you could say that, because those who consider themselves agnostics are taking a kind of evidential approach here. They feel like, and of course you can get very specific about it, specific doctrines.
Yeah.
And it's just those who feel that they can't even through faith affirm or embrace these ideas. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the issue. Now, of course, Kant left the door open for what he called practical reason. All these things that are postulates, as he put it, that we postulate in order to make sense of our lives, to make sense of the world, of the whole human world. And so, and actually, liberal theologians during the 19th, early 20th century were very influenced by Kant in that regard. They said, okay, well, Kant's gotten rid of all those traditional metaphysical arguments, you know, arguments for the existence of God and this kind of thing, and made the way for given prominence to faith. And of course, you do have people who are willing to affirm a whole lot as certain on the basis of faith, and the agnostic would be particularly unhappy with that. So,
Jim, is agnosticism, is that a term only applied to Christianity?
is that what?
Is it only applied to Christianity? You know, Buddha agnostics?
Well, I mean, it's been
Muslim
said,
agnostic?
it's
Can
been
you
said
repeat the
that
question? This back here is so loud, it's hard to hear.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's not your,
Spoken up.
not your fault.
Yes.
It's your-
No, okay,
Is the term agnostic applied to any religion? Are there Buddhist agnostics?
Oh, yeah, well-
Are there Muslim agnostics? Are there,
I mean,
or is it only a Christian discussion?
there is a interpretation of Buddhism that says that Buddhism is simply agnostic about the great questions. You know, when the Buddha is asked whether we have souls that live on after we die, he just says that this is not. Let's see, what is the expression? Not conducive to enlightenment. And so, yeah, you could identify that, and I myself have written about this. You know, there are other agnostic strains within the Christian tradition. You know, some aspects of the mystical tradition, the great cloud of unknown, or the division between apophatic and cataphatic theology, and one of them is more agnostic than the other about the characteristics of God, for example, the qualities of God. You can go. I mean, there are a lot of rabbit holes to go down to in the study of religion. But yeah, I think when you see that in other faith traditions, you could say, you know, I'm agnostic about that. But it's of course, the term was created within the formerly Christian world, and so it's been dominant there.
Yeah, I guess you could just then look at the word agnostic as an adjective or something. You know, like it's,
Yeah,
You
it can be both a noun and an adjective.
yeah. Because while you were talking, I thought, oh my gosh, I guess I'm agnostic.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sitting here going, oh, I guess I'm agnostic, because I happen to not pray for things to happen. I can't, in my personal, I wasn't brought up in a church, and I can't pray. I would pray for the family of a dying child that they can bear this, or they can find solace or something.
Sure.
I can't pray for the fact that the child shouldn't die because it's only 6 years old. I can't do that. I don't think my God isn't gonna go, oh, but that's a nice family and that's a cute child. That one won't die. Now this one, you know, I can't
Oh, yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
And so I think to myself, well, maybe, because I sort of feel that I've been taught, well, you could pray for things, that's a great idea, and it's like, but I don't think God can do that. So I'm sitting here going, well, maybe I'm an agnostic, but then I go back to the fact that, wait a minute, I do have faith.
Yeah.
I don't think God's a miracle worker and he's going to personally listen to my pleas, but I do have faith that there is a God, there was Jesus, there was those, because I don't have anything else.
Yeah,
I mean, I
that's-
need to have something to get through every day and my little trials and tribulations and brain disease, you know, so I have to have faith in something, but I don't know that now that I understand the word agnostic, know if maybe that's part of my thing.
But-
I don't know how to interpret it from you.
Yeah, I mean, this is back to ultimately about faith, and certainly, my view would be that faith is, the theologian Paul Tillich used to say that doubt is the other side of faith. that faith, I experience doubt about all kinds of things, even within a faith perspective. And so there's a certain agnostic, there's a certain agnosticism that is, I think, helpful, that we really don't know. There's a whole lot we don't know. And we trust that certain things are the case. Trust personally in God. But that doesn't require that you say of the death of a child, well, God needed him more than you did, or things like that, you know. So, I mean, it is a mystery. The survivor of a plane crash. Was that person singled out? I mean, these things get into the nitty-gritty of it. But no, I think there is a healthy agnostic dimension to faith. Anything else? Yeah.
I just think that there's a common understanding among many in the public that agnosticism has no place at all, and therefore, because Christianity is so rigid, it's not open to that. There seems to be a communication of that. So people say, I don't want to have anything part of a movement that doesn't allow doubt or questions or those kind of things. It seems to be a kind of a predominant theme in some ways among reporting and interpretation of Christianity.
Oh, gosh. I hope not. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's the view that, I mean, there is the hunger for many people for certainty. Certainty about life and death and meaning and all the rest. And often, if they, somebody undergoes a kind of conversion or latches on to a particular form of Christianity, they say, this is it. This is absolutely true. And there's no room for doubt, skepticism, anything like that. Yeah.
But to add to that, I think when you say to some people, I'm a Christian, you don't know what their concept of that is, So maybe their concept of I'm a Christian is, oh, you're one of those people who have, this set of dynamics that you believe, which is not what I believe. People have their own bias or interpretation of what that means. It's like what are you? I'm a Christian. I know what I mean by it, but it may not be what you mean by it, and therefore you're interpreting that I'm like such and such kind of person. It gets really tricky.
Well, I can remember situations where so-and-so grew up Presbyterian, but now they're a Christian. Because they underwent this conversion experience at some evangelical rally, No, I literally heard that.
My mother-in-law grew up Catholic, and she was English. She grew up Catholic, and she said to me one day, I'm so upset, Bobby Francis, because after I die, when you die, I'll never see you again. And I said, why, Mom? And she said, well, because you're not a Christian. And I said, Mom,
well, that's another part of it.
I'm Presbyterian. And she said, yeah, but you don't believe in God. I went, okay, let's just stop right there.
Well, I mean, the fact is, Christianity is a very wide spectrum of beliefs and temperaments and sensibilities. You have to just kind of find your place in all that in terms of, and also being true to yourself, to your own thinking.
Isn't there something to be said, though, about faith and religion? That faith does make us strong. Our faith does make us stronger through circumstances that we have to go through.
It can. There are also notable unbelievers who have been very courageous about life. And so,
Sure, sure.
so that, I mean, that's the problem.
I think it's an individual thing, because some people lose their faith when they go through a difficult
That's true.
time.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think,
I mean, faith is all I have
I
to
think
get
faith
through
is
life.
just, oh gosh, I've already walked on before Jerry there. We won't be seeing her again for 2 weeks, so. But, yeah, I mean, these are really good questions. And these are questions that I've been wrestling with my entire adult life.
How did you get started wrestling with them? Why?
What?
Why did you start wrestling with these issues?
Well, I was always, growing up, I was, I had a lot of thoughts about things. I was reading books on critical historical study of the Bible when I was in high school. And so I was just, and so it led me into the ministry, but it also led me into wanting to be a college professor. So.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And that's the one I stuck with.